Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum, joined with Kyle Dupick.
Hey, so you sent a really interesting video to me the other day regarding your favorite team, the Twins, and just some specific focus that one of their hitters had. And I think it'd be really cool to explore that a little bit here today.
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
Yeah, it's been a minute, and so this video is a little bit older. Let's see how long ago it is from. It's 4 weeks ago, about a month ago, and the Twins, they have been having they've had a rough start, and so I thought this was interesting to hear from one of the Twins players on his hitting philosophy. So I'll play the video and we'll kind of go from there.
As well of this is where exit velocity is overrated is what Judd's words
That's what I
were.
tweeted, yeah.
And I do believe, I think it's misunderstood is maybe the better word, or sometimes we put just too much stock into exit velo. I mean,
Sure.
Andrew Benintendi flew up the middle finger today, and maybe
Right. Well-
all year to exit velo, because if you can find a spot, you don't have to hit the ball 108 miles an hour.
And it was Miranda who I think blooped one. I tweeted it. I think he blooped the ball into right field, which and go back to Sunday when the Twins took a lead for, well, until tonight, the first time and only time in the top of the first against the Cardinals. Buxton blooped one in and it scored a run. But just to be very clear here, I am not anti-analytics at all. One of my biggest gripes is it feels like they get used one-sidedly. And so like there is a counter. I don't look, if the exit velo is great, that's awesome. But there's also a negative counter to why is it not working? And that sort of just gets ignored. And I feel like fans at times put a premium on, well, here's what it says and here's what.
I want to stop it there for a second because, excuse me, because this was the other reason that I found this video really fascinating, because this is one of the topics that we have covered on this podcast several times, is like, how do we fully utilize analytics and minimize some of its negative effects? Or there's been this feeling, especially on my end, is like analytics has been maybe, I don't want to say taken too far, but it kind of feels like it's been taken too far and people aren't looking at, okay, or rather it's become maybe a sacred cow, might be a good way to put it, of like, well, this is the absolute truth and all the, what analytics says is like gospel and like highly scientific and all this sort of stuff, which is okay. But I think we have to figure out I also put out a tweet today kind of talking about, there's an art to this, because we're not dealing with machines. A lot of the analytics stuff too is also, it's kind of game theory, and the game theory, I think, especially with some of the stuff that, like, say, for example, with Driveline, they hearken, I think, somewhat back to gambling and like blackjack and all these other sort of things, which are very probabilistic. But the game is also very simple and mechanistic as well. So whereas in sport, you're dealing with human beings, and human beings are not mechanistic. There are mechanistic components to us, but because we're complex dynamic systems, we're also nonlinear. And so the analytics side of things can only take things so far. And that's where we did that whole episode on Goodhart's Law, when and part of it too, I think, that we covered in that episode was that the best model for the world is the world itself. Sure. And so this is where it's like, okay, just like, I don't remember which person was talking there, if it was Judd or whoever, but he was saying that, look, I'm not opposed to analytics. And that's the same thing here on the podcast. Like, we're not opposed to analytics. We've had several people on, like Robert. It's more of a question of like, how do we utilize and combine analytics with an ecological approach? Because I do think those two things can go together very well. And the way that I look at analytics is it's about the ability to ask good questions. Your analytics and your statistics are only good as the questions that you ask with them, and also only as good as the data that you collect. So there's those two things. But I think that's where, to kind of start with what he was saying, we've talked about in the past about like bat speed, like, is this the end all be all? Is exit velo the end all be all? And I think that's what they're kind of pointing to here, is that sometimes we don't ask deeper questions because we're so caught up in this metric good. Therefore, yes, it's going to increase our probability, but I think we're also leaving, to keep it in statistical terms, we're leaving possibility or probability for success on the table when we're not combining. So, for example, when we had Max Bay on, right, he talked about mixed models, right? And so you're trying to layer on, okay, you increase your probability of success with, higher exit velo. Okay, but at the same point, how do we capture more of the thing that we want? When it comes to, for example, offense, it's about runs, scoring runs. So then it becomes the question of like, okay, how do we score runs? And so that, I think, is the thing of like, at times I feel like analytics has lost the forest through the trees sometimes, getting too caught up in just the data and what the data says. And because there's value there, we over idolize it rather than stepping back and trying to see the whole forest and the bigger picture of like, what are we trying to do? I don't know if you have any thoughts there, because obviously I could keep going and going, but I wanted to give you some space there to chime in.
I think it's just as a sort of an aside. Isn't it funny that we're in a day and age where, in the video you see he has to acknowledge that he's not anti-analytics.
Right.
You just kind of did it too, right? Not in a bad way. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but it makes me wonder if there were like, podcasts back in the 80s or their did they ever go, hey, I'm not anti the bunt game, right? Like, we're kind of embedded. I think maybe that's the first thing just to acknowledge. We're kind of embedded in a world where like that analytical mindset, if you deny it, you're just seen, and not deny it. That's unfair. Even if
maybe
you question it, or and like even in an authentic, genuine way to try to understand it better, as we were just talking offline on a little Twitter back and forth. It's like, I'm not like denying something here. We're not denying anything about analytics, but I just do think that maybe that's the first step here, is just to acknowledge that we ourselves are embedded in a world where analytics is viewed as the holy grail by a lot of people. And when you start to even ask questions, there can be like, oh, so you just want to go feelings instead of facts. And it's like, not necessarily, because when we start to think about analytics, the thing that's always bugged me about it, and this has only been recently that I've thought about this, but I could never quite put my finger on it until recently, has been, it's almost always about a 162 game sample, and I'm thinking of like, one of my wife and I's favorite movies is to watch Moneyball, right? But like, something that can work over the long haul might not be the best strategy once you get to the playoffs, where it's shorter and a little bit more random and the context is a little bit different. I can think of a video that our student coach sent me, and it was fascinating. It was so cool. This guy he's trying to get a baseball series for somebody to buy it and make it into a show. And in it, he says one of his goals is to try to kind of like create new things in the game that could then be used in the game. And in his first season, he says he does some calculations about how you should get rid of left field and center field or right field. You should get rid of them because and they should just be outfielders, and then you should switch them during the game based on the sidedness of the hitter, and because like the pull side is, you should put your better outfielder in the pull side always. And so we talked about that as a staff at Warburg, and we were all like, oh, that's so cool for 162 games. Also this year, we've seen the toughest plays all year be to the opposite field. And our strength coach played here at Warburg, and when we were talking to him about it, he said, hey, when I played left field, I felt like it was the easiest I'd ever had. And when I played right field, it was the hardest. And it's like, oh, it kind of makes sense because in left field, in order to get on time, often it's just going to be similarly hit balls. But with right field, you're to your righties, obviously, we're talking about, you're going to have flares and balls in the gap hit hard and over your head. And so it just seems like that might not be true for our context. And so all that's to say within data analytics, like context is king. What's happening in the environment? How are those data sets emerging and coming about? And I think that's really important here is that it's just acknowledging from the onset of this entire conversation that data analytics is good, and yet it's not going to tell the whole story when you're embedded in a specific context and you're trying to win the game in front of you.
Because I think a lot of times we don't understand that there are assumptions built into our worldview or how we're viewing the world. And so, for example, when it comes to the data analytics side, it's like, okay, you're assuming that, okay, when I take a large enough sample size, or like, let's say, for example, we're looking at catch probability. Well, that's based upon previous data. Okay. And that's going to potentially skew what is current, like the current situation, because it's based upon past previous data. And so sometimes you're like, oh, okay, that had a really low catch probability and et cetera. But a lot of times I think with a lot of these things, you always have to ask the question of like, okay, how are they doing the calculation? How is this being derived? Okay, there's a number at the end of this, but how is it being derived? And is this, how much weight can I put in it? Say for example, we've talked about this with like, okay, accuracy versus reliability. So for example, when it comes to, let's say bat speed or pitching velocity, you know what? I can handle it not being completely accurate as long as it's reliable and it's consistent.
Yeah.
Right. So even as long as I know that it's off by like 2 to 3 miles an hour or whatever it is, it's okay. As long as it's just consistently that way.
Right.
And so with some of these things, you do have to, but if you want accuracy in terms of like, okay, is this showing me reality? Okay, that's a different question. But anyways, so I think that's where, there are some assumptions when it comes to like these different statistics is like, oh, they're really, this is showing me reality. When instead it's just giving you a probability based upon some way that somebody came up to try to get their best estimate for a measurement.
Yep. And so, like, I'm a math major, right? At some, like, I mean, I could be completely crazy. I was a math major. Essentially, they have an equation, right? They're plugging all these variables in, and they're outputting a sort of number, a catch probability, as you were just saying. That's linear, and from an ecological standpoint, like complex dynamic systems, like that's part of what is embedded within the eco D philosophy. And so just that linear relationship of if this then that, we know from an eco D lens is going to have limits and flaws.
And so like, and this is the other thing I was looking into, oh man, what's the Gödel's theorem? And basically that under every mathematical sort of logic tree or mathematical thing is an assumption that cannot be proven. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the thing of like, people want to try to like ground everything that they can for sure know. And that's just not how, again, when we're dealing with a dynamic complex system, like you're never going to have like 100% knowledge. And that's when we're talking about sport, like that's what actually makes it fun and interesting to watch. Because if you already knew the outcome, then why watch, why be invested and all that sort of stuff. And so there's that element. But I think coming back to this though, of like, okay, I think it's important though. And I think what gets us tripped up is like our desire to know truth. And we believe that science is the way to know truth. And it is a way to get us closer to the truth, but it is not the only way to know truth. And that's, I think, the other thing is like we have to kind of come back to principles. And this is where like Gödel's theorem is kind of helpful and interesting, is that, okay, under everything, there are these principles that you can't necessarily prove, and this becomes an issue for everything that you're looking at. And so really you have to me, in some ways, it's about logic. Okay, so when it comes to, okay, how can I know reality? What are the other ways? Is also perception. Okay, so this is where, again, an ecological approach, what it brings to the table is another way to help us converge on the truth and help us to navigate to make better decisions. When it comes to how we're coaching, how we're helping players develop, how we're helping players figure out how to navigate and to perform better. So with this, okay, like you just brought up, you would think putting your best fielder on the pull side would be where you're going to need to make the hardest plays. But yet it turns out that the hardest plays are actually to the opposite field. Well, you're not going to necessarily only get that information looking at the data analytics necessarily. You might if you challenge your own assumption and ask some more questions. And I think that's where, honestly, in talking with Max Bay and with Robert Fry, like I think guys are starting to ask better questions, and that's what's needed in order for the analytics to get better. And again, to reiterate, I think an ecological approach is going to allow us to ask better questions. Now, going back to what you're saying though, with the perception though, like you need to have some ways of collecting data that's more, you could say, subjective, that's more on the perception side, that like actually gets the experience of the athlete and feeds that into how you're doing your analysis. And that's where you start asking guys in the field, like that one of your players or whatever, like, actually, it seems like, no, what I'm perceiving when I'm out there from experience, it's actually harder. Those plays are harder for me. Right. Yeah. And so that to me trumps sometimes the other information. Not all, but you're going to have to weigh it on a case-by-case basis. This is the thing that I think is part of the point that you're making, is like, we have to look at the context and like, are there other things that can lead us to believe like, we actually should put more weight here. And some of it too is just quite simply, it's trial and error. So I'm going to leave it with that. Do you have anything else that you want to go on before we transition back to the video?
No, I don't think so. I think that I appreciated, as we get back to the video, just it's important to acknowledge that piece before we jump back into what they're going to say of all the data analytics and how, from an EcoD lens, we might better assess what's going on with the full breadth of experience that we're having in the world. And I appreciate how they're trying to navigate this. Like, well, the first thing is that is EV, exit velocity, overrated? I don't think that's right. Like, maybe it's just misunderstood. And I think what they're probably, of course, they're not speaking from an ecological standpoint, but like what they're getting at is like, guys, there's context to this, and that's what they're going to get in with this specific player.
And the other thing too that I think is interesting and fun about this is like, these guys, they're not experts in the sense, they're journalists, right? Yeah. They're covering the sport. They know the sport. Like, they have valuable insights, but yet at the same point, they don't have the whole picture, right? And so that's where I think this is fun to kind of be in dialogue with their content.
And isn't it better? Because I think that it's better in some ways, because I think one of the things that we do poorly, and this is actually something that's so beautiful about the ecological lens, is, for example, if you didn't play professional baseball, then you don't know as much as me. You see that all the time on social media or with coaches. Well, we all know that that's a load of what, right? Like, we just know that that's not true. The best players don't always make the best coaches, but that appeal to authority is often made. And so what you might go, well, these guys are just journalists. They're too far removed from the game. And yet what we've seen in every like really significant shift in pretty much every single, not just sports, but business and academics and everything, is that somebody from outside saw something and went, that doesn't make sense, because they're not stuck into the system. And they were able to go, but what about this, guys? And it made everybody who was in the bubble go, oh, that makes sense. So I actually think that's where these people, if you allow them, maybe 99% of them are wrong because they don't understand the game as much. But it's that 1% that's going to change the game if you can be open and receptive to what they might have to say and how it might connect to make the game better and make our players better.
It's going to change, and I'm like, but why isn't it? And I tried to tweet this with a guy, and he didn't get this. But on Correa, okay, the exit velo is great, but if the ball's hitting the infield now, he can't run anymore. So if your exit velo is great on a ground ball where the positioning is correct, which by the way, these are the big leagues. Teams do have great scouting, like, you know, if nothing else, decks on video, right? Then I need to know how slow Correa is going to defeat the fact that he's hitting the ball. Like there's just always a counter, and that's my thing. Because I don't have a problem. Like, bring up all the stats. Stats are fun, and quite frankly, analytics have done some bad, but they've also done a lot of good. So I don't want this. I'm not old man yelling at clouds of, oh, let's just go back to batting average and simple stats. But I also think that there is a counter to things that sometimes work. Why doesn't it work? And I feel like, especially fans of teams at times, Declan, they get lost in the positive stat. Okay, that's cool, but I want to know what's the negative stat of why it's not working necessarily. So that was my attempted rant, but I think it came across as old man screaming at the clouds.
No, you're good. I definitely know what you're talking about on the Jose Miranda single that you're talking about. So, and this is where, again, stats can...
You want to jump in on any of that?
Yeah, I think it's exactly, it was such a perfect example, right? That at the end of the day, if EV is the only thing that we're looking at, we're not looking at the greater context. In this, the launch angle of the ball, that is ground balls, the speed of the player, how they're shifting him. Is he a young player who they don't have as much data analytics on versus, I assume that's Carlos Correa, is that right? Somebody who's played for years and they know exactly where his tendencies are to hit it. And so that's what I love, is that they're very intuitively, without them knowing, speaking about that the proper scale of analysis is the athlete environment, right? It's not just the athlete and his raw outage to hit a ball hard. It is also what's going on around their abilities, how the defense is playing, not to mention what's the weather like, who's pitching, how's that player been doing, right? Do they have any, are they in a slump versus are they really hot at the plate, et cetera? So I think that's what's beautiful. It's what I was trying to acknowledge before. It's what's so great about ecological dynamics is there is this breadth and beauty to learn about the language and what we need to do. And I encourage everybody to dive deep into it. And yet, two journalists here can talk about the proper scale of analysis being the athlete environment, and they don't even know it, right? Like, they don't know anything about ecological dynamics, but they understand that would be a better scale of analysis. And that's what's so cool about ecological dynamics, is that anybody can actually provide value right now if we just kind of open our eyes and get connected to exactly what's happening.
Right. I was kind of curious to see if I could quick pull up Carlos's stats, because he has made some sort of adjustment. Like, he's been getting more hits. And I haven't watched every single game, but what I've noticed in general of the games that they've done well on, and I haven't seen why they faltered in some of these other more recent games, but they seem to, like, for example, I've had this conversation with Caleb, and we'll kind of argue back and forth, talking about, like, well, why don't I just go for the biggest bang for my buck, which is a home run? Why don't I shoot for that every single time? And then, the rest just become mistakes. And this is going to get into our other topic, because it segues nicely into it. But it's like, look, the percentages, like, okay, at most maybe 7%, but I think it's less than that of all the balls that you hit hard and in the air are going to go out for home runs. So you're banking on a 7% opportunity to score all your runs. Like, that makes it really hard to have sustained success. And that's when you're dealing with the top end and the best guys who have the ability to do that. And so you need a lot of things to converge in order for that one strategy to work. And so I definitely think it works at, for example, like the collegiate level, but again, you have to recruit for those types of players. And they need to be able to hit the ball at a decent enough clip, because this now flips to a different conversation that we were having. And I think I brought up on the podcast before, of like, it's been interesting to hear the shift in philosophy for pitchers of, the pitching philosophy used to be like, throw it down and away, or throw the ball down in the zone to keep the ball in the park. And now or to hit your spots and all this sort of stuff. And now there's a moving back to like, let's just throw it right down the middle because, our misses on average, I can't remember what it was. It was like 10 to 15 or 17 inches. And so just throw it right down the middle. And also too, but here's the thing. And I like this. I can't remember. I'm going to get this guy's name wrong. And I follow him on Twitter, so I apologize. I even might follow me. So I'm going to feel real bad when I get his name wrong here. He's always in my feed because he's always saying stuff. I'm hoping I can just see him here.
This is the point when you scroll. I've done this before where you're like, man, this person is blowing up my feed. And then you start scrolling and they're no longer there when you need them to be in your feed.
Right?
Yep, 100%.
Don't know. Man, I apologize. But anyways, he's a pitching guy, and he was talking about how the efficiency, like the game just tries to find inefficiencies, and then the pendulum just swings from one side to the other. And it's this constant back and forth. And so to me, like what happened was there was an inefficiency. And the inefficiency was, and this to me is like, you have a problem when, okay, your opponent is training to do the thing that you are training to have them do. That's a problem. Mm-hmm. So it used to be the case that the hitters were coached and they were focused on hitting ground balls to second base. And the pitchers were focused on throwing the ball down in the zone so that the hitter would hit ground balls. So that tells me that we have some sort of a problem, because now the pitchers are basically the hitters are training themselves to do what the pitchers want them to do. Okay. So that to me is a problem. And then it all of a sudden it shifted to, hey, let's hit the ball in the air because there's more value when we actually hit extra base hits. Like you have to do, if I hit a double, it takes less to get a guy to score. If I hit a triple, whatever it is, it's a lot easier to score him, right? I can make outs to move him over into scoring position. If I hit a leadoff double and I move him over some way to third and we got one out, and then I hit either a ground ball to the middle of the field, to the infield, or a fly ball to the outfield, we can score that guy from third. And that's all just from hitting an extra base hit, right? And then on the flip side, too, like, do I juice it out of the yard? Like it's always a run. And so the whole notion of the fly ball revolution, like, and all of a sudden, like it's transforming the game. Then now you have pitchers now throwing it right down the middle, or focused more on throwing it right down the middle. And what I heard at a pitching conference not too long, like a couple of years ago, they're trying to explain to their pitchers, like, listen, you throw it right down the middle, most of the time these guys miss. They're going to miss it. Like it's only 10% of the time, or whatever their batting average or whatever is, like super, super low. And you're like, okay, yes, I get it. And really what it is it's counteracting this fear that pitchers had, or this hyper focus on like hitting a spot, hitting corners, this and that. And then they're getting behind in the count too often, and then ending up back in the middle and then getting hurt, all this sort of stuff, or just walking too many guys, right? And so it's trying to free the pitcher up to feel like, you know what, I can throw it to the middle. But it's even better when the guy has a ton of movement and you throw it to the middle and it doesn't stay in the middle. Because to me, the problem here with this whole solution is like hitters are now training to hunt the ball in the middle, and the middle being the mistake. Exactly. That is the pitch that they are hunting. So again, going back to the point I made earlier, like this doesn't make any sense. When you are playing into the strategy of your opponent, there's something wrong.
Hugely. I just saw a video of, I think it was the Red Sox hitting coach sitting on a podcast with 108 Performance and talking about, over the course of the game, if you just hunt a fastball, you're probably going to get 2 or 3 that you can crush. And so in the course of a game, that's what you're looking for. And I'm like, generally, I understand that. I think that makes sense, going to hunt fastballs. Problem is like, what happens when we need to win that game? What happens when we don't play 162 games? What happens when my team goes and plays in the conference tournament next week, and like that solution is not quite as good when we have a center field that's 405 feet? Like, you know, like, and I think that's kind of the issue is that, what is it? We've talked about things being individual and frame dependent within in the ecological sphere. And it's like, what does the player do well? And how can we help them continue to do that, but also expand to become adaptable athletes instead of one trick ponies who then they can be manipulated? Because when I hear the Red Sox guy go like that, I go, man, I hope all hitters hit like that. Because if my pitcher can even just have a modicum of execution, they can dominate that approach so much. Because it's, oh, so you're just looking for one pitch? Oh, cool. Well, then I'll spin and change you the whole time. And then I'll surprise you with like a fastball up or in, and it'll be over. And yeah, you might get me once, but probably not very often, you know? Because again, as you're saying, we're responding to what you're doing. We're not pitching towards it.
Right. And the other thing too is the way that I look at it is like, look, and I even said this at the pitching conference. I was like, and I know one of the major league coaches was, he thought it was kind of, yeah, he was like, you really have the gall to say this, but especially to a bunch of pitching coaches. I'm like, look, you guys can only lose. You pitchers can only lose. You collectively as a group can only lose, you know, because who wins? The hitters. The hitters are the ones that score the runs, not the pitchers. So who actually won the game for you? The hitters who scored the run, and then you just kept it where it is so that we could actually win. That's it, right? Like you could only lose. You can only prevent our team from losing. That's it as a pitcher. And like, and I think that's where this whole strategy of throw it right down the middle doesn't make any sense to me, because, okay, where is the most damage done though? Is it not in the middle? Isn't that where the most damage is given up, is in the middle, in the heart? And that's where, like, I pulled up Savant here, and you look at, okay, in the heart, the batting average for, I don't know, I mean, either side, for just like down the middle is around 300 to 330. And then it starts to go down as you go up a little bit. And then it gets in the 200s, but you drop it down just a little bit, get a little bit lower. Like it's less than 260 or 270 here. And so to me, it's like throwing to the heart of the plate. And maybe that's what they mean by middle, is just throwing to the heart and like missing around. But it's like the most damage is kind of done in the middle of the zone. So, especially middle up. And that's where hitters are training. They're training to hit the ball that's up and elevated, because that's also a hard pitch to hit in general. Like that fastball up, it's a hard one to get to, but at the same point, like guys have been training to hit that pitch. And so that's where it's like, unless your stuff moves a lot and has a lot of movement. Yeah, like, because when I talked with Troy Rawlings, he talked about that's what his pitching coach told him to do, is throw it to the middle. But he had like a cutter or whatever it was, a pitch that like it didn't go straight. So he needed to aim middles to let that thing just move, and then it would do what it needed to do to hitters. And so if that's not you though, if your pitch doesn't have, your primary pitch doesn't have a ton of movement, and you just let that thing move off the middle, then I don't see, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because if you're like a four-seam ride guy, or just like an average fastball that's straight, like you throwing it to the middle just doesn't make, even sliders, right? Like sliders, middle of the zone, that doesn't, again, like, I think I've talked about this before in another podcast of this, this whole notion of, okay, eventually, if your intention stays the same, eventually your body will self-organize to achieve that intention.
It will.
I think I use the example of like Aaron Judge, right? His whole thing of like snapping the bat and feeling the barrel like drop and all this sort of stuff. And eventually, because probably for the majority of his career, like growing up, for probably like 5 or 6, 8 years, maybe 10, he was taught to swing down. He needed that feel to be able to get actually on plane and to get that, like the swing that helped him have that first really dominant season in the big leagues. But then the following year, like, because he kept doing it, eventually his barrel started tipping way too much and he started missing underneath it. and to Aaron Judge's credit and to Teacherman and whoever's working with him, they made an adjustment, and he doesn't do that same feel anymore because eventually his body adapted to that intention. And so I think the same thing will happen to guys where, okay, your intent is for them to just throw it down the middle all the time. Eventually, they will start to do that because that's what they're intending to do. And because you're also working with elite athletes, especially at the professional level. There will be a few guys where, it moves a ton and it's not going to end up there. That's totally fine. And that's probably the right thing for them. But for everybody else, like, this is where it's like going back to the whole thing. It's like cookie cutter stuff. Like, this doesn't make sense. You have to understand who you're working with, and like, does this make sense for this pitcher and what they have?
Yep.
And so, anyways, that's kind of my big thing with this whole thing of like analytics, but also the pitching stuff here with throwing it down the middle. Even though I'm a hitting guy, yeah, great, throw it down the middle. Like, we better hit that.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
All right, let's jump back into this video and keep the conversation moving.
Backup arguments on either side. So that exit velo was 65 miles an hour, which is very, very low. That's in the blue. That's very low. Balls don't go off from the bat in major leagues at 65 miles an hour. But two things. Number one, the bat speed from Miranda on that was also very fast. He swung that bat at 77.9 miles per hour, which is actually very fast. That's above league average. That's a high bat speed. And Miranda is a free swinger. We've known that for the last few years since he's been up. He's going to swing at almost everything. And he also does make contact. He might not draw a lot of walks, but he'll make contact, foul some pitches off, and you can still find a spot a little bit. I remember talking to Ryan Jeffers about this last season because Jeffers last year had one of the lowest average exit velocities in baseball, despite being, which is weird because when he does muscle up a ball, it goes very far and very, very hard. And I think I remember having this combo with him, and he owns, some of the hardest hit home run exit velocities. When he hits a home run, it goes very hard. And I asked him, are you doing that on purpose? Like, is it your goal to not swing as hard as you want to? And he said, it's interesting. As I've been up here for as long as I am, I now just kind of know where to put the ball. And there's definitely times where the hitting department and the team wants me to up that exit velocity, and he kind of has the counter of, well, if I know how to hit. I'm not saying that Ryan Jeffers is by any means a polished hitter, because he's not Ichiro in his prime, but he has definitely seen enough at bats to where he knows where he's doing, where he doesn't feel the need that I have to hit 100 miles an hour exit velocity because I know where to place the ball. Now he's also using that torpedo bat, which has obviously been the number one.
So for me, that's where he basically, for me, has said the things that I'd be looking for as a coach. Then it's more about, okay, now can you back it up, right? Do your numbers, does your performance prove that? But if you, like, to me, that's the starting place. Like, how do I encourage that more? Because even with our guys, it's like, look, your home runs aren't all like this. This is where I think, going back to, I don't know if we've really talked a whole lot, especially recently, about affordances, right? So once you get, we've discussed more recently about specifying information, calibration, attunement, all that sort of stuff. The next piece of this is affordances, right? So specifying information and being attuned, all this sort of stuff, and calibrated. Now affordances start to come into the picture. And what are affordances? They're opportunities for action. And these things, affordances, emerge and decay, meaning like they show up and they'll show up for a certain period of time and they'll disappear. They're dynamic. And so basically what Jeffers is saying is sounding like, to me, like he's beginning to perceive more affordances. And this is the other thing, is like, not every ball affords the hitter the ability to hit the ball out. Now, what do I mean by that? Based upon their current action capabilities in that moment, they may not be in a position to hit the ball out. Obviously, we want to, all of us, who have played and been in the batter's box, we want to try to hit every ball out. But any good coach that's been around knows, like, that oftentimes doesn't end up playing out very well, right? You end up trying to do too much, and then things start to go sideways and you don't end up hitting as many balls as you should. And that's why, like, the old school coaches are like, just, hit a ground ball, to second, or hit a line drive, this and that, and all that sort of stuff. And there's some merit to that, but I think it's more about, again, and like we talked about before, a good heuristic leaves all the good options on the table. And that's where I feel like, where there is this current fight going on between, like, these old school approaches and the new school approaches, is that they're making it an all or nothing, versus, to me, I'm not saying that an ecological approach is the center necessarily here, but what I do think is an ecological approach allows you to have your cake and eat it too. Like it allows you to bring all these things together and utilize them in the proper space. And so that's where this idea and concept of affordances starts to play in, is like, okay, an athlete in the moment, the ball will basically tell them what they can do with it. And they know how to place it in such a way that they can do something advantageous with it, something productive with it for the game. And so that may be that, you know, for Jeffers, a certain pitch may afford him going the other way and hitting a single, or hitting it to the gap for a double, or hitting a hard ground ball through a hole in the infield. Okay, so like, to me, that is just as advantageous, and that's still productive. Like, because to me, the other thing is like, okay, yeah, you can hit the ball hard, and that's going to give you a greater chance of, you know, a home run or an extra base hit or whatever. But if the field conditions or the surface, not surface, but the field dimensions, right? So it's either the conditions, there's wind blowing in to a certain part of the field, etc. Right? Exit velo or doesn't take into account your launch angle. Your launch angle also plays a big role. Okay, yeah. What I've seen this year, when the wind is to our hitters, backs, and it's blowing out to any part of the field, you can put the ball up in the air at a high launch angle of 40 plus, or even 30, 35 plus, and the ball will go out. Like we just had that actually the other day. Hit at 102, and I don't know, it was probably close to 50-degree launch angle, and it went 335 feet, and the fence was 330. You're like, okay, like he hit it hard, but it was a really high launch angle, and it was only the fact that there was wind blowing out to left field that pushed that ball over the fence. Otherwise, that's an out. And so this kind of comes back to this whole thing of like, look, if you're only focused on one thing, are you able to actually adjust to the changing conditions? Because it's not all about exit velo. It's about your launch angle, and it's also about placement. What's your spray angle? All these things matter. Like this is a different conversation too. Like everybody talks about backspin. And I really thought Mark Spencer, I think it's like the data cage, he does a lot of bat fitting and stuff, and he's worked in golf. His big argument is actually top spin line drives are really, really useful. Because what is a top spin line drive going to do? It's going to go over your infielders, and even if you hit it really hard at the right launch angle, it's going to drop in front of your outfielders. And the other thing too is like you do it right, and I've even seen it because like our best hitter, he top spins a decent number of balls just based upon his swing path. And it's been really, and he also hits the ball really hard. And it's been fun to watch him like just shoot the ball over the third baseman's head and drop it down the line, and that thing just like start flying to the corner. You start doing that too with the gaps and different things like that. Like, granted, at the college level, the grass isn't mowed as nice as it is in the professional level, so the thing doesn't like just absolutely just scream and fly right out into the gap there like it will at the pro level. But at the same point, if you want to look for doubles and stuff like that at the collegiate level, like those are the things, because yeah, okay, you can hit the ball, 96, 98, maybe 100, whatever, and you get too high of a launch angle and you put it into the gap that's like, I don't know, 370 to 380, 390. That thing hangs up there and you got, a good fast outfielder. Those things, I've seen it plenty of times, like our guys hit it well into the gap and it just gets tracked down by an outfielder. But you hit that thing with some top spin, that thing's going to drop and die in front of the outfielder. And like, that's the thing of like, what does the game actually reward? Not what's the theory of like, what is probability statistically best, but it's like, what does the game actually reward? It rewards a hitter for when the ball gets down safely before a defender can actually get you out with it or whatever. So like, to me, that's where it's like, actually what Mark is saying actually makes a lot of sense. And it goes against this like common narrative. It's like, okay, this is where, again, ecological dynamics for me personally has opened up my mind to just being like more open to the what is of the game. Like what is possible? You know, and like I know there's lots of people who highly respect Altus and Stu McMillan, right? Like this is one of the things in the talks. And by the way, you know, I don't know if this will get out. It should hopefully get out before the Sport Movement Skill Conference. Highly encourage, you know, people to go to that and or go get the previous recordings. I don't know if Stu is going to be at this year's Sport Movement Skill Conference, but he has spoken at all the past ones. And like this is something that he really talks about of like opening your mind to other possibilities by just simply asking questions. And so this for me is the thing that like an ecological approach really does is opens your mind to like more possibilities, like seeing new strategies, finding new ways, because like that's going to be the thing, right? Like this is the whole driveline thing, adapt or die. And this is where I think an ecological approach will help you do that, because it's part of one of the core principles is like skill adaptation. You know, it's all about it is about being adaptable. It's not about getting married to one idea or one strategy or one focus or one tool or modality, because what is analytics? It's a tool, it's a modality, but you need some sort of framework to work behind it. And for me, this is where I feel like ecological approach, the principles, the main core tenets, like they to me, like it helps guide me and steer me to what ultimately I'm looking for, which is how to be successful in the game and learning how to, like, this is the other thing, right? And you brought this up, is like, you know, one of the other freeing things about an ecological approach is before I felt like I needed to know the answers. I had to always bring the best answers. An ecological approach freed me up from like this feeling like I constantly had to be hunting, searching, you know, for the latest thing and all this sort of stuff. And rather, an ecological approach helped me like chill out. Like I thought I needed to know like everything about biomechanics and all this sort of stuff. Like that was the future and everything. Like that's how I was going to help guys. And it just felt so overwhelming. But an ecological approach has given me a framework to help me discover the answer that is right for the person in front of me. And I don't need to know everything. I just need to know how to find the answer and how to like search for it. And that's true when it comes to like, say, for example, you know, people ask like, how do you learn to code and whatnot? And what all good coders will tell you is like, they're really good at finding the answer. It's not about knowing the code to write. It's about knowing how to find the answer and like figuring out how to converge on the code or the way of thinking to design and put code together. And so that's true here when it comes to coaching and what the ecological approach brings to what I think coaching in general, but also to player development and performance.
It's going to challenge you as a coach to be far more present and active in the practice, connected yourself, trying to figure out what is the problem that is currently emerging and how do I help the athlete descend on the answer that works best for them in that situation. Because I think that there are a lot of people who are doing a good job of recognizing as coaches, the one size fits all for athletes doesn't fit. You know, one size fits all doesn't fit anybody, because far too often we're just basically comparing the average player who, number one, doesn't exist, and number two is a really average player. and so I appreciate that desire to meet the individual where they're at. But I think sometimes we can, again, from an ecological lens, proper scale of analysis, athlete environment relationship, it's not just the athlete. It's not just like, oh, this guy struggles at exit velocity, so we should up that. Well, what is the context right now asking from him or affording him? What opportunities for action are there? And I think that this is where, again, this is so hard because I sort of want to find a third way. I don't want to try to like bring the old school and new school together. That's not necessarily what's really happening. But the number of times where a young man who's a great bunter doesn't see that the third baseman's back, he comes back and go, hey, where was the third baseman? And he goes, oh, I didn't even look. And it's like, we are not helping you stay connected, right? Like we are not helping you scan the environment, be completely embedded and connected. These are the simple things that guys have done forever. When a runner stands at second and he looks to the outfield and sees their positioning. What's he doing? He's getting connected to the environment. He's going, oh, so if a ball's hit in the air, the corner outfielders are way on the lines. So if it's in the gap, it's down, one out. I'm not going to like freeze. And I now have some semblance of information prior to guide my action so that then when the specifying information hits, I can have that control law. That's way better because I have more information at my disposal. And I think that's the thing that maybe with this data analytic revolution, we've sort of taken that power away from the players at times to help them be connected and embedded in the environment to figure out what is my opportunity for action right now? What is the environment affording me? Who is the pitcher? And all sorts of different scales of analysis that allow them to be more successful at the very thing they want to be successful at. It seems like what we're doing is narrowing their range of the solution space, going, well, you're really good at X, so we're going to do it a lot. Well, then they start shifting towards that and pitching towards that. And next thing you know, what seemed like a good solution is now a really, really narrow solution that you have to hit a ball certain location in a certain spot at a certain exit velocity to be successful. And now the very thing that was successful before is not as quite as successful because, again, they're adapting to you, but you're not adapting to them because you're just sticking with that one plan.
Mm-hmm. I want to transition just slightly. How have things been going, for you personally? Like, what have you been seeing in the game? Like, now that you've been applying these ideas and concepts for the majority of a season, what have you seen? What have you learned as you've been interacting with these ideas and seeing how it's now how the game is responding back to you, how your players are responding back to you and to these ideas?
Probably the most fun and hard part of all of this has been how our guys need to adapt game to game to game. And so therefore, there is unquestionably a conversation at the end of every pitcher's outing where we are talking about what went well, what adjustment could be made, and what's some adversity that you're kind of thankful for that you faced in that game. And then from those three things, how then do we craft your next live or guide and direct a side session if they're more of a reliever and they pitch a lot and it's sometimes a little harder to get them lives, but especially for our starters. So that's happening where we are seeing something emerge in the game and we're immediately embedding them in a problem that emerged that they need to solve to have more tools in their tool belt. And yet at the same time, there also needs to be an incredible amount of exploration because, and I don't think that ever stops. Tyler Yerby has said this, and I've really appreciated it. And I think that's really come to fruition for me this year has been our Friday night starter. One of the things that we've talked about in his last two outings is being really open and receptive to, man, he's probably made, 9-10 starts at this point. And it was always like kind of the same beginning that we'd attack hitters. Well, we've had 3 games in a row where, and it really came to fruition when he faced a team, he had his normal attack plan and they hit a bunch of balls hard. I think they had like 3 or 4 hits off of his normal attack plan and then 3 outs that were really hard fly balls. And we were about 13 hitters in and I walked up to him in between innings and said, hey, this is what's emerging. And this is what the scouting report said. So we're going to change. I need you to trust this process. And we did something he's never done before. And he dominated the rest of the time and threw a complete game. And from there, we started to have these conversations of like, I need you to be really attuned and adaptable so that when something emerges in a game, we can go change right away because you're good enough to do that. And sure enough, he's had 3 straight starts where he's pitched in 3 diametrically opposed ways. And he's even brought out new pitches that is like a sinker cutter guy. One day it was like, hey, I think we might need a 4-seamer today. Can you just throw one in the bullpen? This is literally before the game. He goes, I haven't thrown one in like a year and a half. I go, that's all right. Let's just see what happens. He throws it like 3 times. We take it in the game. He strikes out like 3 guys with it. It was just like, but that's what we needed. That's what the context called for in that game. And so yes and amen. Use the game to construct your practice environment to solve the problems that are emerging. And yet be really attuned and adaptable to help the guys continue to explore, so that when those things emerge in context, they've already seen a lot of problems and they've already solved them, and they can be super connected. And so it's been really cool to see guys come in after the inning and go, hey, I'm seeing this and we should attack them. And I go, oh, that's great. Let's do that. Or let's adjust this way. I'm seeing the hitters. They seem to be wanting to do this. That specific hitter, he can't handle. Great. Let's attack that. So I think those are the two big things that I've seen and I've been applying so far with this new lens during the year.
I think for myself, the challenge this year, has been, okay, we started off really, I think offensively, we were way ahead earlier in the year than I was anticipating. And that actually is sometimes actually concerning, because like you get hot too soon, then it wears off. And so the whole training effect like worked really well just for the wrong part of the year. And we start playing and then guys start struggling and then different things, right? And that's where, more recently it kind of came to a head. One of our players, it was interesting, didn't want to be in the cage. I called him out, and then he ended up having a conversation with the head coach afterwards. And then we were having this conversation about one of the things he brought up is just like, well, I just don't see the value of seeing like spiked curveballs and this and that or whatever. And what was interesting to me is like, because that day I'd moved everything back because we were about to go play a bunch of teams with we're throwing guys that are slow. It was like, well, I know I throw really slow, so I can actually just back this up and just kind of start throwing, like normal at a further distance and off the full mound. And what was interesting to me is that, we've talked a lot about, and different guys have this mentality. And this was good because like our head coach was telling his players, like, look, man, if you leave here, you go somewhere else, you want to go to Division I. I remember the last ABCA I went to, going to this thing that Bobby Tewksbury helped put together, and Wake Forest, their pitching and hitting coaches were there. And they basically talked about how, like, especially on the hitting side, everything they do is challenge. Like, they make it hard, which aligns with like Caleb Abney and what like his philosophy is, like, just make practice really hard. And like, I'm kind of on that train too. But what I've kind of learned, especially with the guys that I deal with, right? Like I'm at JUCO, and like just the experience that guys have had, either they've had a ton of success previously, and or like they're just not used to, or the programs that they were at before previously, they weren't really that challenged, right? And so putting them in these really challenging environments where the ball is getting thrown all over the place because we turn the machine up, or I'm throwing, short box to them or whatever. The conclusion that I came to after I moved things back and I started talking to some of the guys is like, you know what? Maybe I'm making it too challenging. Maybe this is beyond their challenge point. And we talk a lot about, from an ecological perspective, about finding the athlete's challenge point. And I think in the past, the reason that I haven't I pushed the challenge point or pushed them past their challenge point is because it's like, I feel like I don't have enough time. And I've started thinking about like, well, if I want, the thing that like kind of got me initially thinking about it was this one martial arts guy made a video on something that's actually not that new, but it was more of a new video. And he was talking about how like, MMA fighters aren't sparring anymore. And like, that's been improving their game. And actually, cause like, I think about it now, like Holloway, I think this was a year or two ago, he, had said that like, he doesn't spar anymore. And it's not that they don't spar, it's that they do more playful, like light sparring. And it's not like the full, like high intense sparring. And it was interesting to me because when I was working with somebody who had been going to a lot of the movement meetups and was a martial artist and whatnot. And I started trying to work with him, and we're trying to figure out like, okay, how do we apply these ecological ideas to fighting and like training fighting and like self-defense and all this sort of stuff. And the big thing he told me at the beginning is like, look, man, if you start this thing too open, it's just going to, and with somebody who is unskilled, it's going to go way too fast. It's going to get too intense way too quickly. And it's just like the technique, all of it, it's just going to go out the window. It's just going to be like just an absolute, just mess. And so and you're not going to learn anything, because at that point you're just reacting and you're not actually working on anything. And so that got me thinking, back to this of like, oh, okay, you know what? Like, I do want to warm up where I was more playful. Cause like initially I tried years ago to like, okay, we're going to go easy and I want you to hit everything. And guys just had a really hard time buying into that. I still really believe in it, but it's more about, you have to build a culture around that. And so what I've kind of come to now is like, okay, with this live stuff, maybe to get it more playful or whatever, is like to scoot it back. And now there's more time, because that's honestly though, when I've been thinking about it too, from like a hitter standpoint, is like in close doesn't really help. Like, because you're not learning to track it over the full distance. Like there's a big difference in terms of like distance tracked, and perceiving a ball and learning to track it over a longer distance is like a completely different skill than like see ball react, because we had a light flight machine and we would put it in close, and guys were like, you could see they'd just kind of cheat it. And they'd like get their hips going. Everything would be going. The ball wouldn't even be out of the machine yet, or like just starting to come out. And then they'd make the adjustment late and just like hit it. They were already moving. And I thought that was really interesting, because like that behavior is not, you don't see that behavior generally speaking in the game, right? Because then you're going to get out front on all off speed stuff. And so anyways, that's where to me, like the whole like distance piece like becomes an important piece. And so anyways, kind of where I'm at now is like, you know what? Maybe to make it more playful, I need to move further back, and now I can be further back, and it's okay, and because the struggle that I have is like, you still need to see velocity, like learning how to handle that and that pressure. But at the same point, like I do understand now what the player is kind of saying is like, look, I can't really necessarily work on some things if the intensity is always really high. But I in some ways, it's more of like where that person's at, right? Like I train myself to learn to relax, to block a ball, right? Like I had to train that. That took dedicated focus and effort into doing that. And I think in the same way that can happen in these challenging environments is learning how to get yourself mentally prepared to actually do that sort of a thing. But sometimes you have to meet the players where they're at. And so I think that's where like this year, that's the thing that I've kind of learned a little bit more, as I've kind of discovered a new potential way that for next year, because like we're at this point now that we're outside enough. This happened to be like one of our last days being inside. So we don't really do this as much anymore. But at the same point, like I think that's where, something that I'm looking forward to next year doing more of is like scooting the mound back, being all the way up on the mound and throwing like my full mix of pitches, understanding that it's going to come in slower. And then one of the hitters says like, yeah, I felt like I could actually like see it more, had more time to react and all that sort of stuff and whatnot. And because, like it's so easy to get some guys on like some of these breaking balls and different things just because it's like purely like see ball react. And it's just it's more of a jerking type of a thing. It's not a see it be smooth. You're not connected. It's just like knee jerk reaction type of a thing. And so that's been one of the things more recently that I think I've learned. The other thing too, going back to like guys making adjustments, like that was the thing that I preached all year, was like your ability to make adjustments. And it's been interesting to see our best hitter, like, be resistant a little bit or feel like he's resistant to it, but yet at the same time doing it and then having success. It was interesting the last game because he had like basically, I don't know, he was probably like anywhere from 8 for 8 or 6 for 8 of just fly balls. And this kid again has massive juice. He's hit the hardest ball I've seen, like at 114 for a home run. Like just maybe I can't remember if it was harder than that. But anyways, it was just like wow. Like I haven't seen any like JUCO guys do that. But at the same point, like there's been me and him like there's been a little bit of like butting heads a little bit or like, whatnot. But at the same point, like it's been interesting to see like, okay, guy might not acknowledge, listening to you, but at the same point when they go and do it, like you're just like, I don't care whether or not you listen to me or not, but you're actually doing it. And one of the things that was interesting was like, hey man, like you need to hit ground ball. And then we get to a situation because his first at bat flies out. Then his next at bat, he comes up and you got 2 guys on in scoring position and like infield's in. less than 2 outs. I think it might was like no outs. It's like, dude, the one thing I don't want you to do right now is hit a hard ground ball at somebody or a low line drive. Like, you can just hit that fly ball to the outfield, like totally fine. That was the other interesting thing of that stretch where he was like, I think he went 0 for 6 or whatever, 0 for whatever for the previous 2 games, but he had like 2 or 3 sack flies. And it's like, dude, I don't care. Like, I'll take that. Like, you're still productive. Like, I know internally he probably is like frustrated that his average isn't going up, but it's like, dude, those are runs. You understand? Like, okay, you could have hit a single and yeah, maybe we'd still scored the run, but like, you could have struck out, you could have done whatever and not scored the run and still been an out, but that out helped us score. And then, like, you also get that stat. That's the other thing too. But anyway, so we go back to less than 2 outs, infield in. What does he do? It's a low line drive right at somebody. Fortunately, he hit it hard and like he got lucky and the guy just misplayed it and we were able to score a run. It was like, oh man, it was like, I wish you had made that adjustment earlier for your first at bat. But then his third at bat or the following at bat, he gets up there and he laces like that line drive top spun over the third baseman's head. And you're like, all right, sweet. And so, and then later, I think in that series, he hit a backside home run. And so you're like, look, like this is the thing that you need to do sometimes is like, okay, right now I'm flying out way too much. I'm mishitting it. So I got to go to the opposite extreme just to get me back on track so that like, all right, I'm going to focus on hitting line drives or like ground ball, line drive. And then it's just swing the bat normal and bam, you do the thing that you normally can do. Because like, I think the system sometimes just falls out of calibration. Whatever way that we naturally like lean too much to an extreme, we just end up there too often from what we're naturally doing. And then we have to, correct in the opposite direction. And then we can go back, we recalibrate, so to speak. And so that's been fun to watch, like his growth there. And I think that's partially why he's had as good of a year as he's had this year is like the ability to adjust, even though like, he is sometimes it feels like as hard headed as like all the rest of them, or like there's some friction there, but I'm very happy and proud of the work that he's done this year. Cause it's been a hard year for him, but he's made a lot of strides, whether he realizes it or not. So, and same with some of the other guys too. So it's not just him, but that's just like an easy example.
Well, it makes me, those 2 things highlight, both that not just always having it be really challenging. And particularly like when you hear people say that, what they really mean is just like high velocity all the time, unbelievable stuff that they're facing. And then, finding different solutions for that specific player, kind of exploring the solution space. Really, I think that the thing that jumped out to me there is this idea of variability in what you're doing, that doing the same thing over and over, you might get good at it for sure. Right. And yet it might dig an attractor well that ultimately doesn't allow you to navigate around it when that is not a good solution. And I think it's funny sometimes too, when we're talking about like, well, we want to make practice really challenging. And all that means from the hitting side is just like really high velocity and like disgusting stuff. And it's like, well, isn't it kind of challenging too to like face the lefty who threw a soft and is kind of a junk? Like that's challenging too. We can acknowledge that. So let's prepare for all those things. Let's be able to solve an abundance of problems so that any emerging problem that comes our way, like we've kind of prepared to solve lots of different problems so that we can adapt in that moment. And I think that's the thing for me that, that I'm hearing and learning here is like, as well as just, it can be easy in the structure of our coaching to get in our own attractor wells of coaching, right? Where like, this is what we do every time, but really trying to be embedded ourselves in the coaching environment of how do I change this every day? Even if I have the same general activity that we're doing, oh, well, I can just change distances. It made me think right away, ooh, what a great way to, if I have an on-field where it would be way easier rather than in a cage or something, I have an on-field live. Why couldn't we just take that hitting mat and go back 3 to 6 feet on a guy whose solution is velocity? Like he can generally blow it by people. And if they give them that extra, extra time, well, that's going to help him explore the affordance landscape that's now different. And so I think that's what's really cool is how can we just variability is just the lowest hanging fruit. Rob Gray always says, and I just so agree with that. Like you can do the same thing, but how can we vary it in different ways to help them solve new problems so they can be a more adaptable athlete solving an abundance of motor problems,
Yeah. And I think on a slightly different note, just along with that, because there's the sophomore, and he's been struggling a little bit, averages down, all this sort of stuff is another interesting. Well, okay, I've contrasted with another one who was a sophomore at the beginning. So the first one that I was talking about, he started off well, hitting over 300. Then he, kind of hit a cold streak, felt like he needed to do more, all this sort of stuff, whatnot. And then felt like he was struggling. Then the other guy who was struggling was talking with him and was talking to him about his approach and everything. Like his average wasn't great, less power this year at the beginning of the year, all this sort of stuff. And I was just, kind of talking with him. He's just like, yeah, I'm not worried about it. The one who had a slow start. And, he's like, I feel like my approach is better. I'm better able to stay on the off speed stuff and all this sort of stuff. And I'm just sitting there going, yeah, but like your results are like not good. Like they're just not as good. And so I knew I couldn't really shift anything as far as like try to get him to go back to his old approach, whatever. It was more like, okay, what is actually the next lowest hanging fruit? And also just if I'm listening to him, like what do I feel like is the issue? It's like, oh, this apathy of like, yeah, I'm fine. It's not a big deal. Like, I don't care. And it's like, I had a conversation with him and I don't like, this is the interesting thing. Like, I feel like I have to get away from feeling like they really get it, because like the response that I got from him, and this was too, like, I could kind of feel like, like he didn't really want to hear what I had to say necessarily or whatever, like that I was, how it is with, your own kids, right? Where you're like talking to them and you can feel like they kind of just, they're listening, but they kind of just they don't want to be there right now. Or like, they just don't like, you feel some sort of like, they're not fully engaged with what you're saying. And so what I was trying to communicate to him is like, look, man, I just want you to think about your approach and like your mentality or whatever. And just think about like what ways. You don't have to give me an answer. This was, I think, the key thing was like, because I feel like players always feel like they need to give you an answer. And I said, is like, look, man, I don't care. You don't need to give me an answer now, or you don't even need to give me an answer ever. I just want you to think about like, okay, from a mentality standpoint, what either about your current mentality or what type of mentality could you adopt that you feel like gives you an edge? Because I feel like that's the thing you're missing. Is like last year you had an edge, and this year, like I feel like you don't have an edge. And that was kind of the gist of the conversation we had. And after that, I don't know if it was immediately after that or not too long after that. Like I think he started getting a few hits, and then all of a sudden we go up to Bismarck, and he just goes off, goes 7 for 11 for 13 or whatever, hits like 700 for a 4-game stretch. And like kind of, like it's gone down a little bit, but like he's still getting hits, right? And like he's still being productive. And I look at like, well, what happened with him, and then watching the other player go in the opposite direction, and like watching him put a ton of stress on himself and all this sort of stuff. And so I had a conversation with him, and I was like, hey man, like you need to have confidence in yourself. Like you need to have swagger. Like when you pitched in one of our first games against like a top rank opponent, and like he went out there to go close out the game, I was like, I knew we were going to win simply because of like the swagger that you had and like the mentality. I knew like it wasn't about your stuff, because you threw from the same slot last year. You got hit around by Luther and whatever, and like so it wasn't about the arm angle and all that. It's about the swagger, and that's why you went out and you closed out a game against like a top 25 team. And I'm like, that's what you're missing right now. And I think the other thing I told him is like, look, man, it's not about what the current result that you're getting. It's about the direction that you're going. Is it getting closer or further away? And you need to not worry about the results so much, but rather, am I am I getting closer or further away from like hitting the ball well, and like, do I have that swagger? And I told him like, look, man, look at your teammate. You're just one series. Like, don't get caught up in your average, and also don't get caught up in your self-worth being tied to your performance too. Like, you're a good player. Know that you're a good player, and walk around with that swagger, and like, things will work out. And his average, and I was like, you're one series or a couple games away from like getting your average back up. Like, like it's crazy actually, like, because of the small number of games we play, like, it doesn't actually take that much. You have one or two good games, and all of a sudden your average just like comes all the way back, and it's just like it's nuts, because he's hitting like, I don't know, like 270 or 275, whatever, around 280, and like, I think that would weigh on him, but like, I think he hasn't looked too much at the stats, because the balls that he's hitting, like, he's not like, oh, give me that hit, all that sort of stuff, right? Like, he was for a moment, and now he's not. And now he's like, he seems more comfortable in the box, and he's starting to do what he's done before. Like, sometimes you're still like, dude, that's a bad swing. Like, that intention there was not the right intention. But you're starting to see like it's leveling itself out. Like, he's getting more decent swings. He's being productive, driving and runs, different stuff like that. And he's hit a couple of balls really well. And so, like, I think he wouldn't even be able to do that if he was still in the same headspace that he was in before. Right. And I think that's where some of the other, I think, important things are. And that's where too, like, I don't know how it's going to end up for him, but I'm proud of like the work that he's done so far. Like, I mean, it's not easy, when your average isn't where you want it to be, but at the same point, like, you got to understand from a mental standpoint, like, dude, the double that you hit in the gap, even though you're only, maybe 2 hits on the weekend or whatever, or on the last couple of games, those are still big hits. Like, those, you can't do that if you're like sitting there beating yourself up or pressing or worried about your average and how you're looking to other coaches and whatnot.
Yeah. It feels like every time we land the plane within, our podcast, it's always like trying to identify something, the takeaway for why this has been helpful for us. And I think what you highlighted right there is like, the individual in front of you is the person that you're trying to help, and the athlete environment dynamic, that being the proper scale of analysis, what their intentions are, what are they focused on, those things. That's what comes about here. And that's why this is so beautiful, but it also, just like we can acknowledge, can be very difficult, because you're in that moment, and you have to navigate that problem with them. You have to ask questions, you have to encourage, you have to create clear intentions, you have to get them beyond, in this case, the results, even though the results are really important. And so I think that's what's so helpful, but that's also where we can, again, just kind of have grace for ourselves as we're trying to navigate this. Like, how are we continuing to grow in our ability to meet the athlete where they're at, embedding them in a context, understanding their context, their current headspace, what exactly is going on, and how can we help them guide them towards a better solution in that moment, and how that'll change based on, gosh, I just had an 0 for 9 versus I just had a great weekend, and how we help them navigate through the ups and downs of a season that is small and short, and the stats can go up and down, help them be focused on the right things to ultimately get what everybody wants. Results, positive results, so that they feel great about themselves and they can help their team win.
Yeah. And I think for me, like, the thing that I try to have to remind myself is like, it was interesting because, I was listening. Well, we had a momentary break there to that clip that I was trying to pull up earlier. And so what the clip was saying is that we want certainty. We want certainty for the answer. And that was also what my tweet was about earlier today, of like, like, there's not this system that we're so obsessed about like certainty and having the right answer. And like, I feel that like that's part of our culture of like, I want to be able to deliver, the results for the person, right? Like, cause I mean, it's even like this business mindset of like, under promise, over deliver. Like, it's all about the delivery element of it. But yeah, you have to recognize what's going to give you, like, going back to what we we're talking about before with like analytics, like probability, what's going to give you the best chance the greatest probability of success. Understanding that doesn't mean you're going to have success. And like you're not going to have that guaranteed certainty. And I think that for me, and even for players, is like the hardest thing that you have to like struggle with as a coach. And so that's where like I kind of come back to like from an ecological approach too, of like, okay, it's not about necessarily the result, but it's about how can the result that you got inform the next one, like, and get you closer to where you want to go, that gets you back on track. And going back to like, it's not about the result necessarily, it's about the direction of travel. Are you going more towards the results that you want, or are you going further away? And if you're going further away, what are the adjustments to get you back on track? That's it. Like those are like, it kind of actually comes back to like, what's your locus of control? Like I have more control over the direction that I'm going and my awareness of what direction I'm going, rather than on always being able to achieve the result, or just understanding what are the things too, like to me, this again, ecological of like, okay, what are the things that I need to be attending to and focused on that are going to lead me to getting the best, or giving me the best possible chance to get the results. And so with that, unless you have anything else, I'll land the plane there.
No, that's good. That's a good finish point.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode.